So for our students here tonight, Dr. Rhonda Hamm was one of you. She went to Central Unified Schools and is now an educator and scientist with a PhD working in the field of entomology, which she'll tell you all about. She's passionate about providing enriching science and agriculture experiences for everyone, and she's received plenty of recognition for her work. Dr. Hamm was named an American Association for the Advancement of Science If-Then Ambassador. In 2019, she was recognized as an Indiana Woman of Achievement with Distinction in Science Education and was the 2016 recipient of the Distinguished Informal Educator Award from the National Science Teaching Association. She also received the Entomological Foundation Medal of Honor, for her work in founding 3 successful STEM programs. Along the way, Dr. Hamm has also had her share of fantastic failures, our GATE Enrichment class theme this year that Mrs. Boyd spoke about, and she'll tell you about those too. We're so fortunate to have her here with us tonight to tell her story, beginning as a Central Unified student to all that she does now as a scientist. Please join me in welcoming via Zoom our guest speaker, Dr. Rhonda Hamm.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the invitation to participate in your family night. I am excited to be here and even more excited to get to talk to my hometown. So I'm looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So let me just share my screen and we will get started. All right, is everyone seeing my screen? I just like to check to make sure that you are seeing it. So if I could get a thumbs up or yes.
Yes, we're all good. And I just realized
Perfect.
I forgot to do a quick switch over so you can get a chance to see our room tonight.
Hi, everyone. So great to see you all. Thank you for taking your evening and being here with me.
So we've got
it's even later where I am, but thank you for being here. All right. So I'm going to launch into a little bit about an introduction to my career and what I've learned about insects and some of my fantastic failures, since that's kind of the theme we're working on for this year. So without further ado, here's what I thought my career was going to look like. So in kindergarten, I wanted to be a teacher. I loved all my teachers. I loved school. And so I wanted to be a teacher. In high school, and even a little bit before that in middle school, I found I loved animals of all kinds, dogs, cats, whatever, it didn't matter, the four-legged kinds, I should say. And so in high school, I really thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so that led me to be involved in FFA. And so I was at what's now the Central West campus and was taking some of those classes as kind of job preparation for what I thought I wanted to be. And then in college, I kind of switched things up. So I started out as a veterinarian path, but then I switched to agricultural education. So thought I wanted to be an ag teacher at that point. So high school Rhonda, I just wanted to give you an introduction to her. I did a lot of different things. So, when you start talking and people ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? You don't have to be just one thing. There are lots of options for you. You can be lots of different things. So for me in high school, I played clarinet in the marching band. And so I was a band geek, as they said. I was also in FFA, as I mentioned. So I showed sheep, as you can see here in this bottom picture. But I also participated in science fairs. And so learned more about agricultural sciences and agri-science. And that has really helped me in my career. So I sort of start when I talk about careers and say my career really started in high school. And then I've just built on it from then on. And I was also on the basketball and tennis teams. And so I was also in sports. So I liked to do a lot of different things. But something else I should mention is high school Rhonda was also terrified of insects. And when I say terrified, I mean like run out of the room if I saw a creepy crawly that I couldn't get rid of. And so I was really scared. And so one of my things that I want to get across tonight is that sometimes being scared of things is okay and it allows you to try something new. And sometimes, you know what, you don't like that. And then and you never have to do it again. But at other times, you can learn to overcome your fears. And that's really what happened to me. So I like to say that I moved from fear to fascination because insects were super scary. I mean, I was really scared. But as I learned more about what they do and how they interact and do things for us, but also sometimes against us, right? So sometimes they're a pest, they eat our food, or they're eating us like mosquitoes, but sometimes they're making honey for us. And sometimes they are decomposers, so we're not swimming in piles of poo. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the fascinating world of insects. But really, I moved from that fear to fascination through learning. And that's what you're all here doing, right? Is you're learning more about science. You're learning more about the things that you like and maybe the things you dislike, and maybe even some of the things that you're kind of frightened by. And the more you learn about them, maybe they become less scary, like entomology and insects did for me. So then I went to Fresno State University. So you're all probably familiar with that university. I stayed at my hometown and went to college there. And like I said, I majored in pre-veterinary medicine for one semester and decided, you know what? I really like a lot of different parts of agriculture. I love the animal science, but I also like plant sciences. And I also like the idea of teaching others. And so I kind of went back to that original slide that said I wanted to be a teacher to begin with and thought, I can do both. And so that's what made me switch my major to agricultural education. And that's actually what my undergraduate degree is from. And so when I say undergraduate, that's the bachelor's degree. So that's the degree you get after high school. If you continue to college, a 4-year college, you'll get a bachelor's degree. And so that's the degree I got then. I also minored in communications. So I've been able to use those two skills and those two things that I've learned very well throughout my career. And so then I moved across the country. So I started in Fresno. Then I moved to upstate New York. And in New York is where I went to graduate school. So if you want to continue your education beyond a bachelor's degree, you can get a master's degree and a PhD. And I did both. I did both of those at Cornell University in upstate New York. And so that's where the star is there. I spent about 7 years there doing both degrees back to back. So I did a lot of school. I loved school and I loved learning. It's a little bit different. The 4-year undergraduate degree is a lot about classes that you take. The master's and PhD is a lot about asking your own questions and getting to answer those and doing research. And so I did a lot of that during that time when I was in New York. And then I graduated from there and was looking for jobs, and I ended up in Indianapolis, Indiana. So that's where I'm calling you from tonight. I am in Indiana, so I am halfway across the country, a little more than halfway across the country from you. I wish I was at home with you all, actually. I do miss visiting, and I visit Fresno quite a bit because I still have friends and family there. But this is where I'm at today, and I actually am working as an independent consultant. So I'm doing my own thing at this point, but I want to tell you about my career adventure in entomology. So I've done a lot of different types of entomology. And so a lot of people think entomology is studying insects, but what does that really mean? What do you study? And there's lots of different things that you could study. And so some of the things that you could study are systematics. And so what does that mean? That is describing new species. So you get to travel around the world to collect insects and describe new ones. There are estimated to be millions, and I'm saying that M with an M, millions of insects that no one else has ever seen before because there are so many on the planet. So there are people that go out and collect and describe new species. And there are conservationists. So how do we help species survive? That's something else you could do. There are forensic entomologists. So how do you use insects to help solve crimes? That's something else you could do. But what I have done is I've done laboratory research. So working in the lab and doing genetics is a lot of what I did in the laboratory. I also reared insects in the laboratory. And by rear, I mean grow. And so in order to test things on insects, we have to have available insects. And so we have to grow those insects. And so that's what I did for a long time. And then I'm also an educator and a teacher. So I love doing things like this because this is part of who I am and part of what I get to do as an entomologist, including science communication. Those kind of go hand in hand. So sometimes I'm talking specifically to student groups. Sometimes I'm talking to parents, sometimes I am talking to what we call the general public. So anybody that comes to a talk on science. And then I've also done field research, and I've done field research in a lot of different areas, including crops. So peaches, plums, nectarines, grapevines, almonds, pistachios, corn, soybeans, lots of different crops. And then I've also done it in urban pest. So you might wonder why this picture here in the bottom, like that looks like a vacation photo, right? Of me at the Statue of Liberty in New York. And it does look like a vacation photo. But what's interesting about this photo is this is actually a field site of mine. So in urban pest, one of the insects that I worked on were termites. And so termites were actually in this pedestal that the Statue of Liberty stands on is a wooden structure. And termites were eating the wooden structure. So one of my jobs was to go and make sure that the termites didn't damage this to the point that we had to have expensive repairs. So my job was to control the termites. And so I got to go out to the Statue of Liberty with the employees before it opened up to the public. So no one was there on site. A pretty amazing experience. So that's something that you can do. And then I also worked in field research on houseflies. And most of my research there was done at dairies. And so this picture here is me actually at a dairy in Australia. So I did get to travel a lot as well in some of these roles. And this picture here, I'm standing in what's called silage. So this is part of the food that would be fed to cattle. And I am collecting with my net the houseflies. And it smells pretty bad because you are in basically a dairy. So it's not, doesn't smell great. These other pictures here, this is me in soybeans down here. This is me infesting. So I have a little paintbrush. So I'm putting caterpillars onto a corn plant because we're looking to see, okay, how much damage will that caterpillar do to these different types of crops and different varieties of corn or hybrids of corn. And then remember me talking about rearing and having to grow your own insects? That's what I'm doing here. So these containers are full of fly maggots. And then these containers here behind me, these cages, are full of adult houseflies. And so this is me in graduate school. That's what I spent a lot of my time working on. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that I've had failures in every single one of these. There's not a time where you don't fail, especially in research. Research is all about asking good questions, and sometimes you don't know how things are going to turn out, or you're asking such a new question that it hasn't been done before. And so you have to work out some kinks in between to figure out, okay, how should I set this study up? How does the technology even work? Because maybe it hasn't been used in that particular way before. And so there's a lot of different things that you can fail on. And so one of the other things I wanted to mention about this Australia trip is that sometimes you're standing in a smelly, not so beautiful place with your, boots all taped up, and you look up and you see these beautiful birds. So these beautiful parakeets were in the rafters in this same barn that I was in. So sometimes you have to just look a little harder for the beauty around what you're doing and where you are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about insects now. I'll go back kind of to my career and some of the failures in a little bit. But I also wanted to mention that I forgot to mention, actually I'm going to go back, sorry, to this slide. So when I was at Fresno State, one of the things that I was devastated about, and it was a huge failure that I thought at the time, I took a chemistry class and I didn't do very well. So I was a pretty good student when I was at Central, all the way through from elementary school. I was salutatorian as my 8th grade graduating class. I was a top 10 graduate of my senior class graduating from high school. And so I really hadn't ever failed in school. And so a C on my transcript felt devastating. I felt like I had failed myself. I had failed, like, why couldn't I understand this subject? And really, I did the best I could. And so if you do the best you can, that's okay. 1C, 2Cs will not hold you back from being a successful individual. Even an F in a class, if you fix it and you continue to learn and you realize what you could have done differently, That's okay. That you have to learn from your mistakes. And so I encourage you to just say, you know what, it's a learning opportunity. I can do this and it's fine. So I wanted to just be sure to share that story because we're talking about fantastic failures. And to me, that was a huge failure, but in hindsight, really didn't mean much. So sometimes things that look like a failure really aren't, but we feel them. And I remember crying and having that feeling of having failed. So let's talk about insects a little bit. Let's move away from my career path a little bit, talk about some insects and the cool things they do, and then happy to talk more about my career as we go along. So how do insects grow? So there's actually two ways the insects grow. One is called incomplete metamorphosis. And so that's what you see on this slide. They have an egg, nymphs, which look an awful lot like the adult, and then the adult. So they're basically just miniature adults. The only way to tell a lot of times between nymphs and adults is adults end up with wings. Nymphs don't have wings. And so if it's a winged insect, that's a lot of times how you can tell. The size, not always a good indication sometimes. But things like grasshoppers and cockroaches and crickets, they use this type of metamorphosis. So incomplete metamorphosis is what they use. And then the one that you're probably more familiar with is complete metamorphosis. So this type of insect has 4 distinct life stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. You might also know a larva as a caterpillar and a pupa as a cocoon. So actually what's inside the cocoon is a pupa. And so these are things like beetles and butterflies and bees and flies. They all have complete metamorphosis. And then insects have different mouth parts. And why that's important is because then we can understand how and what they're feeding on, and if they're a pest or beneficial sometimes. That helps us know. And so a lot of our beetles have chewing mouth parts. Caterpillars, when they're in the larval stage, before they become a butterfly or a moth, have chewing mouth parts. When they become an adult, they have siphoning mouth parts. So they go from chewing to siphoning mouth parts as they mature and grow. So that's an interesting one too, because the same insect can have 2 different mouth parts at 2 different stages in its life. Then you have the piercing sucking ones. So those are the ones like mosquitoes that are going to poke into you and suck your blood. And then you have some of my favorite, because I worked on houseflies for so long, are the sponging mouth parts, which are your houseflies or your any fly really. Besides mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are technically a fly too. So some flies have different type of mouth parts, but some of my favorite houseflies have sponging mouth parts. So I want to talk a little bit about insects and the variety of them and why I find them fascinating. So they are super useful. And one of the things that they're very useful for is decomposition. So if we didn't have this tiny little insect that is here that you see, this is a dung beetle. And dung beetles are exactly what they're called. They roll these balls of dung and they lay an egg on it, and that larva hatches and eats the dung. If we did not have insects like this, we might be walking through piles of poo on our way to school or on the playground, because whatever animal happened to come by in the middle of the night, there's nothing to make that decompose. So insects are really good at that. And so we have them to thank for decomposition. We also have termites, which I'll tell another story about termites in a little bit, but termites are great at decomposing wood sources. So not a lot of things can eat cellulose, which is what wood is, but termites can. So they're one of the things that can help, like in the forest, decompose a tree and make sure that those nutrients get cycled back into the ground and used. Insects are also great food for other creatures. And so you can see that this bluebird here has a couple of different caterpillars in its beak to feed its young. And so thanks to insects being so numerous, they can actually be great food sources for other animals, including birds. And then of course they make food for us. And so we can eat insects, but we can also eat the products of insects like honey. And then we can make clothes out of them. So this is a silk moth. This is where silk comes from. So a lot of people don't know. They think maybe that's a synthetic fiber that's made. Nope, that's made by an insect. And so this cocoon is actually what we use to make silk. So those are some of the useful characteristics of insects and things that they do. They also are super unusual and just cool. And so one of my favorites is the leaf insect, and it looks exactly like a leaf, down to these little crinkled brown edges that you would find on an actual leaf, right? They also mimic a leaf. So they sway a little bit like they're a leaf blowing in the wind. And so I think that's just amazing. And then there are stick insects. So this stick insect was one I happened to find again in on that trip to Australia. And so they're just very unusual. A lot of times people put the beautiful butterflies on there, and that's also very cool. They come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, colors. They're brilliant. Insects can also be destructive. So here you can see a bunch of weevils. This was actually in some bird seed that I had in my garage. It was loaded with weevils. They had just made a huge mess out of them. And then I just told you that termites were useful, but I also told you that I had to protect the Statue of Liberty against termites. So termites can also be destructive. So depending on where they are, they can be super destructive and eat wood. And so this is an example of them having chewed a bunch of tunnels in this piece of wood. You don't want that to happen in your house because that makes the structure not sound and causes a lot of damage. And so we want to make sure that we control them. So they can be destructive, but they also can be amazing architects. So these termites that we've been kind of talking about can be beneficial, they can be pests, and they can be just amazing. This structure here is the nest of a termite. Mounds like this can reach over 17 feet high. The other amazing thing is that they actually include ventilation. So in deserts where they occur like this, it gets hot. So they have to be able to cool themselves so they don't overheat and basically dehydrate, right? If they lose all their moisture, they can't live. And so they actually have specialized chambers in here for cooling and ventilation. They have specialized chambers in here for food storage. They have some that hold their eggs. They have some that hold the queen. And so they have like an entire city inside these mounds, and they can control that in a lot of ways. So that's also super cool. So why should we study insects? Why should we care? There are lots of different things to study. So they're important pollinators. So because we have pollinators, we have the variety of foods that we have. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't have the variety of foods. Many, many plants rely on insect pollinators in order to survive. So 1 in every 3 bites of our food is thanks to a pollinator. And then some are agricultural pests. So they eat our farmers' crops and the food that we eventually want to eat in our homes. So we want to make sure that we can control those and have the highest amount of food supplied so that we don't have people going hungry, right? We also talked about household pests. So the termites, they can get into our homes and we need to control those as well. Some can vector diseases. So if you're interested in public health and helping people, preventing insect diseases is a way to do that as well in the entomology world. And there are important what we call biological control agents. So we use some good bugs against bad bugs. And so the common one that most people know is a ladybug, right? So ladybugs eat aphids. Aphids eat our crops. So we can use ladybugs as a biological control against those aphids. And I mentioned a little bit earlier too that they produce things that we want, and they are an important part of the food chain for reptiles and birds and mammals and lots of different parts of the food chain. And you know, I bet if I asked everybody in the room, you could all come up with something that insects do for us or against us. And you probably would be right because they do a lot of different things, and they're so diverse that really there's no environment except the deep ocean that insects are not a part of. So even on Antarctica, we have insects that occur. So they are very, very diverse. So if you want to enjoy insects or learn more about them, what could you do? Here's some ideas that I came up with. You could go on an insect safari in your neighborhood. So see how many insects you can find flying around or walking across the ground or in the dirt or on the trees, and kind of take note of what's similar, what's different, where are they, what are they doing when you happen to look at them. You can build a solitary bee home. So that's what is here, right? So actually you see a little bee right here. These bees need little holes to put their eggs. And so each of these that are what we call capped right here, so they look like they're filled in. This bee has taken a little honey or a little pollen ball and stuck in there, and also laid an egg. So she put her food for her larvae in there. The larvae will eat that pollen ball. And then once it is an adult, so remember it goes through complete metamorphosis. Once it emerges, it chews its way out. So you can see this little hole right here. It chews its way out, and that gives us the adult bee. And so solitary bees like to use things like this to lay their eggs. You can plant native flowers for butterflies and bees to make sure that they have enough food, so they eat nectar. So they need lots of flowers in order to survive. You can create your own insect collection. So one of the things that I had to do as an entomologist is create a collection and describe a certain number of different families of insects. So we characterize insects in a certain way. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can get a book and start characterizing your own and creating your own collection. And then you can observe insect behavior. What's it doing? Where is it? Is it flying? Is it walking? Can it do both? Did it jump? Did it go far? Did it run fast or slow? So you can observe all those things and learn more about them. The other thing you can do that's kind of fun, and I've done this with some students actually when I was a teacher, is to build your own insect. So now that you know kind of the mouth parts and the types of metamorphosis, you can pick a life stage and create an insect. What would you name your insect? So fun fact, if you find a new species of insect, you get to name that insect. So that's how new insects get named, is somebody discovered them and they said, I want to name it this. And so you can name your own insect. You can figure out where it lives, what it eats, what adventures does it have, where does it go. And so going back to the very beginning in my career and the fantastic failures portion of my talk, none of my career and none of my path would have been possible if I'd let fear run my life. Because remember, I was terrified of insects. So all of this career would have been different had I not said, you know what, I'm going to take a chance on learning something new, and it's scary. I'm going to try it. If I don't like it, I never have to do it again, but I'm going to try it. If I hadn't said that, I would be giving you a completely different talk today, and my life would be different. And I don't know if it would be better. I doubt it. I've had a pretty good run. So I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. And so don't let fear stop you from trying something. You don't have to do it again if it's still like not your thing, but you just never know what being open and trying something new can do for you. So I'd say be open, try something new, even if it's scary, give it a try. And if I hadn't persevered, I wouldn't have created inventions that I have. So I actually have some patents, which means that I've created new things. And if I hadn't, a lot of those new things we don't know anything about, right? And so I had to fail along the way to figure out, okay, that didn't work. What could work? Okay. And keep asking questions. I was always asking for like, what's the next thing? Okay, if that didn't work, what can I change? If I'd have done only the safe and easy things, right? So we have a lot of classes sometimes that are super easy. And if I'd have only stuck with those, again, I wouldn't have challenged myself, and you don't grow if you don't challenge yourself. So set goals for yourself that are hard and encourage yourself to say nothing is impossible. Everything is possible. It might take a lot of work. It might take failure. It might take time, and it may not be instant, but the reward from doing it is way better than anything that's safe and easy. I will say that. And yeah, I think that's the best way to continue to grow and learn. And I'll leave you with what my definition of fail is. So fail is your first attempt in learning. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Hamm. Really appreciate all that you shared. Does anyone have any questions? Now let's give a round of applause. And I love the ending with first attempt at learning, because that's such a great perspective to think about those attempts that we make. It's never just going to happen the first time. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Hamm? You have an entomologist available here for questions. All right, let me get over to Terrence here. Can you hear us okay, Dr. Hamm?
I can hear you.
Okay.
What year did you work on the Statue of Liberty? What year was that?
Oh, that's a good question. It was 2010, I think, because it was actually under some construction. And so parts of it were closed.
Any other questions? We've got time for just a couple.
How many patents do you
I have 7. I have 7 patents.
Thank
And
you.
they're in a variety of different technology areas. So that's something else. A lot of times we study one specific thing as a graduate student. So my PhD was in houseflies, but my patents are actually in a few different technology areas, actually 2. So I have 2 patents that are around a bed bug detection system. So looking for like scents and smells that bed bugs produce that could be picked up by an electronic sensor. So I know nothing about electronic sensors. So the important thing too for scientists is to be able to work with others. And so you have to work as a team. So those people that knew sensors and the electronics part didn't know bed bugs, right? And I knew that. And so together we could make this product and this thing happen. So a lot of times we're working in teams. We're rarely working by ourselves. I always had someone else that I was working with, and I was not always the smartest person in the room. And you will find that you're not always the smartest person in the room. And it's great to have other people and they have their parts to play. That's how we get the best answer, is if everyone is bringing their knowledge of what they're good at, and I'm trusting that they know their area as well as I know my area, and together we can build something really cool. So that was what 2 of my patents are. The others are in what we call RNAi technology. And so what that means is we use the genetics in the insect to control them. And so we can kind of modify how their genes work and basically turn them off from working right to control pests specifically. So the ones that are eating our crops.
Well, you answered that question, so I'll ask you a different one. I was gonna ask you about what you've done. What was the outcome with the Statue of Liberty? I know you said you had to work on preventing the wood from falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah, so the outcome of the Statue of Liberty is that there were termites there. And so we have a product that we can put in the ground. It's a bait station. And so the idea there is that termites will come to this bait station. So termites live in a colony. The only one that's reproducing is the queen. And so the queen is what you really need to focus on because she's the one laying eggs and causing the problem. And so what we do is this bait, the workers come, eat this bait, they take it back to the colony. So it doesn't actually control them. It doesn't kill them right away. What it does is it allows them to take it back to the colony. They feed it to everything else and everyone else. And then that controls the population. And so we can, we have to continue to monitor because you never know with things and people coming back and forth, you never know when another infestation is going to happen. So we leave those in the ground to protect it long term, and we come back and check it every so often to make sure that it's still working and that there's still enough bait there to control. So it's an ongoing program. But yes, the termites have been eliminated at least once, if not twice, because like I said, we had reinfestation at least once that I know of. But that's not my site anymore. So I don't have a up-to-date, like in 2024, what the status of the termites on Liberty Island is. But we also protected Ellis Island. So those 2 islands both had this bait protecting it.
Yeah, I want to get to our STEM activities. I'm going to take one more question. I don't know if you're not available, that's okay. I was actually just thinking we could stay on for those that maybe have questions.
Yeah.
If you have to, we'll get started with our STEM activities as well. So let me have one more question for the larger group.
When you were still scared of insects, what insect did you really hate? Like the most?
Oh, that's a good question. What it was all of them. I will say I didn't like very many of them. The only ones that I maybe liked were butterflies. butterflies didn't seem scary to me. But anything else I didn't really like. I will say that the insect that kind of got me over my fear were ants. Ants are super interesting, super cool. They live in a colony, they work together. They do really good things. They can control other insects because they eat them. And so ants were the ones that I found less scary and started working with. So that's the very first insect I ever worked with, are ants. And so learning more about them and then saying, okay, they're not as scary as I kind of thought. And then moving into some moths and some caterpillars, and then moving into some stink bugs. And so as I grew as a scientist, I added additional insects in, and now there's really not any that I'm really scared of. There's some I would not pick up because I know that they will bite or sting or whatever. But I'm not really even scared of those. I just know what their behaviors are. So by learning about them, I have been able to say, okay, they're not as scary.
All right, Dr. Hamm, let's everyone give her another round of applause. Thank you so much.